Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I hope you are doing well. If I'm being 100% honest with you, this is the sixth time I have restarted this recording because even though I have done this for a very long time, when I say done this, I don't mean podcasting. Yes, that too. But I have been teaching yoga, running my studio, and being in literally, I'm doing air quotes here, the business of yoga. I still find it a little awkward and almost cringy to come here and promote things. So I was wondering if some of you feel the same way sometimes about your stuff. But without distracting you any further, I want to give you an important update. Okay. Now, November 7th is when my teaching yoga to beginners course begins. Okay. This is completely online and it is a combination of two training formats. One is live sessions where we are in a Zoom room together. And then the bulk of the training is with pre-recorded content in a content library that is organized by chapter, by videos, and that'll take you further into understanding what it means to teach yoga to a beginner successfully. We explore both sides, the student as well as the teacher, and we understand how to build ourselves up in a way where we can make the students succeed. So I have spent, the past decade teaching beginners yoga. That's how I built Aham Yoga. Aham Yoga started with honestly a handful of students, and some of them are still with us since day one to the 10th year. And we built our studio up from beginners yoga. Okay. In many ways, literally taking that one student and then taking them through the life span of being a practitioner. So from a beginner yoga to somebody who went on to continuing asana, some of them became advanced asana practitioners, someone went to learn more pranayama and restoration, some are even teachers at the yoga studio today. So what am I saying? Don't let this one slide. If you are a yoga teacher who wants to improve your skill set when it comes to teaching beginners and other students, because you've heard me say this before, the blueprint I offer in this training can be applied to any class, and it will definitely serve you in multi-level classes as well, not only beginners yoga. I do think beginners are a very hard set of people to teach, and which is why the average yoga teacher training stays away from them. Okay, so it's happening on November 7th. There is online about 3 live sessions. The rest of it is online self-paced learning. You have access to the course until December 31st. You also have a manual, a checklist, so it helps you stay on track and you do not lose track at any point. You will have done for you class plans. And then after the course ends, you will also have alumni sessions to make sure that you are able to take what you learn and you're applying that in your classes, in your real life. And then you come back into the alumni session and we reboot anything that's not working. And you also get to share your success stories. But the most fascinating part for me is when I get to review your class plans, and I do them by myself. There are no assistants in here. It is just you and me directly talking, exploring. I review your class plans that you build based on the blueprint shared. And I also watch your teaching videos and give you feedback, detailed feedback, because I believe it is valuable to have someone who's gone ahead of you in some of these things to see what you're doing. And just, I don't think there's another teacher training out there that goes in depth, especially with the online ones, and sits with you and gives you feedback. And because of that, I enroll only a certain number of participants based on my bandwidth. And we are at this point about 80% full. Okay. So if you are listening to this and you want feedback, you want support, you want clarity, you want to build your confidence as a yoga teacher, that don't let this one slide. Again, it starts November 17th. I have already sent out the replay of the info session on the newsletter. But if you haven't seen that, make sure you get signed up. One more round of it will go out in the weeks ahead. Okay. So November 7th, enrollments are open. Look for the link in the podcast description as well as the show notes or on my Instagram handle. Okay. In today's episode, I walk you through a snippet of the training. I explain how to break down what is yoga to a beginner. To be very honest, this is something I struggled with for a very long time. Sometimes, even today, I'm standing in front of the class and I'm trying to break down what is yoga to them. And each beginner is different, right? Each group is different. And I still have to find creative, new, effective ways of sharing what is yoga. So I hope you enjoy this short episode. Again, remember the date is November 7th, okay, 2023. You get access to all the content right away, but the course ends December 31st. All the details are online, and you can also write to us or reach out to me on Instagram if you have questions. Again, we are in that final last call set of practitioners before we close enrollments. Okay, I will see you on the other side. Enjoy this episode. Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a 6-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in. The easiest way to explain what is yoga to a beginner is to be honest with them. Okay, you have to shed the expectation that you need to decode all of yoga in a few minutes before an asana class begins. Okay, you cannot give them yoga philosophy, or I'm doing air quotes here, dharma talks, and really expect a beginner to understand everything there is to know in yoga in a few minutes. Okay. A member of my mindful yoga teachers community once told me that she was taught in her yoga teacher training that she needed to give dharma talks before every asana class, and how she never felt like she knew enough beyond the asana aspects of yoga to do something like that, and just felt fake. Okay. So the thing I want you to realize is we need to stop pretending as yoga teachers that we know all of yoga, because we don't. Okay. It's not possible to know all of yoga. And you may know some parts of yoga. You may even know some parts of yoga really well. Okay. But we don't know all of it. And it's really liberating to admit that to yourself. And honestly, it's the truth. Not anyone who teaches yoga today can claim that they know all of it. Okay. Because there is just so much to know, and then some more. So also in the modern context, right? Most beginners will be starting with asana. So a lot of what you hear in today's conversation will be taking that into account. Okay. We'll be taking into account that the average person, you and me included, we begin yoga today by starting asana. Okay. So just remember that as the backdrop to today's conversation. And if you and I met, say, a decade ago when I started teaching yoga, when I say yoga, started teaching with asanas, I would honestly struggle to explain what is yoga to a beginner. Now, I struggled because of the following reasons. Firstly, we always met in an asana context, right? Where people came to learn yoga poses and came to deal with things that were going on with their physical body. Right. Secondly, we rarely had the luxury of time, because in modern yoga, we have squeezed yoga into an hour-long activity to do. It's on our checklist. Get to yoga, go to groceries. You know, it's something we think we have to do. And if you stream your yoga from apps and YouTube videos, that hour is further being cut down into smaller chunks of time. Thirdly, it just didn't feel like the right environment. Right? Because not everyone who learns asana needs to learn all of yoga. Now, you and I as yoga teachers, we have a responsibility to at least try to learn whatever we can in yoga. And we have to try sincerely, and we have to work hard towards it. But not every general asana student has to bear the same responsibility that we teachers do. Okay. So not everyone who comes to an asana class needs to learn all of yoga. Okay. And lastly, and I think this is the most important one, I was really struggling to figure out how to make the practice relatable, or how to explain it in a way that it was relatable in a few minutes before an asana class, and to make it palatable and digestible to a newbie. Because there's just so much yoga I was learning. And we as yoga teachers, we tend to drown in information overload, right? And I had to learn how to put on blinders and to say the right thing at the right time and moving the student from confusion to clarity. And that was my biggest challenge. So the approach I encourage you to adapt is you teach the beginner what they can relate to first. Right? And this has become a glaring problem in modern yoga if you think about it. We as yoga teachers, we often teach students what we know versus what they need to learn and what they need in that moment and what's relevant to them. Okay. So teaching beginners yoga is not about teaching them what we know. It is about meeting them where they're at and addressing what's going on with them. Okay, so this is a shorter episode, but I wanted to give you some input on how to explain what is yoga to a newbie. Again, especially in the context of an asana class, which is where 95% of yoga practitioners will discover yoga, me and you included, I'm guessing. Okay, but before that, remember this. You don't have to teach all of yoga. You don't have to break it down in a few minutes on day one, all of it together. You can definitely structure how you explain what is yoga to a beginner. You can add clarity a little at a time, but don't just give information for the sake of it. Don't do it to sound knowledgeable. Okay. Secondly, see the student in front of you with your head and your heart. I've said this in an earlier episode where we spoke about teaching yoga. Okay. Notice them. Notice them again with your eyes, with your heart, with your senses. Put yourself in their shoes and try to understand what it is like for them and what questions and obstacles they may be facing. Thirdly, you want to operate from a point of abundance, not lack. Okay. There will always be another time to tell them a little more. Okay. You don't have to do it all at once. And then lastly, ask yourself, are you able to explain what is yoga to yourself as if you were a beginner? Now, if you struggle and you're not finding the right words and the right language, then there is more work that needs to be done there before you explain what is yoga to others. Okay. Once you've gotten these considerations out of the way, okay, I'm going to be reading an excerpt from a part of our manual from the training. And this is a preview of what I say in class whenever we're running a beginner series or there is a conversation going on with a newbie in class. Okay. So again, this is in the context of an asana class and you'll hear a few different things. I may or may not say all of this at once. I may say it across 2 classes. I may repeat it, but essentially it's about conveying a message about what is yoga for a beginner. Okay. So here goes. Yoga is a vast, deep, and rich practice. It's ancient and it has its origins in India. It's lasted for centuries and we're left with a rich body of knowledge and practices to adapt. But essentially, at its core, yoga is a lifestyle. It's a way of being and living, a way of thinking, breathing, and interacting with yourself and the world. And there are many ways to learn yoga today. One of the most popular or visible methods of learning yoga is through the physical practice. Now, the physical practice is often called asanas, okay, or yoga poses. That is where you and I will begin, okay? We go from the external environment to the internal. Now, the physical practice will take time, and it's not about perfection. It's about repetition and consistency. Remember, yoga is a skill that gets better with practice. Just like you can't master a musical instrument in a couple of hours, it's the same with yoga. You can definitely get started, but over time, as we keep practicing, we get better at it. We'll begin by learning yoga asanas or yoga poses. Some of these poses will be standing. Some of them will be on your hands and knees. Some will be seated. Some are lying down. But every class that we meet, we'll chip away at learning some of these poses through repetitions. There are hundreds and thousands of poses, but in our series, we'll be learning the most fundamental ones that will help create a strong foundation for you. Okay? But before we get deeper and start our practice, I want to clear up some misconceptions about yoga. Okay. Firstly, you probably have heard this, right? Many people think they need to be flexible to do yoga. Flexibility has nothing to do with yoga. Though, as a result of a consistent practice, you may eventually become flexible in the body and perhaps even in the mind. But that's not a prerequisite. Okay, so don't ever feel bad for not being flexible enough. Yoga is not about touching your toes. There are also many ways to practice yoga, right? And you are just starting with the physical practice. But there are other important aspects that in our limited time, we may or may not be able to explore. And those are yoga lifestyle aspects, there's yoga philosophy, there's history of yoga, there are deeper practices of yoga that we won't be able to get into fully in this course. But know that after this course, there is plenty of opportunity to learn more about yoga, and you're at the entry point with these poses. Thirdly, there's no measure of being good at. Okay, it's not about the number of repetitions. It's not about how we look in a pose. It's not about comparisons or competitions with yourself or others. It's really about how you feel in the moment in the practice. Okay, and it's about noticing and being present with yourself, something that we'll be talking about in the weeks and months ahead. Yoga also helps you to become more mindful. Okay, but where does mindfulness start for you? It starts by listening to the instructions and trying to do them as best as you can. Okay, it's completely normal to get distracted, but just notice that you get distracted. Everyone will get distracted at some point. It's more about bringing yourself back to the next instruction each time. Okay, and lastly, yoga is not about stretching. It's equally about strength and stability. When I say yoga, I'm talking about yoga poses here. And though you'll feel like you're stretching, just know that's a very limited aspect of yoga, and there's much more to the practice. Okay, so that's some of the context I give a beginner on class 1. Essentially, I try to build as much context and clarity and set an expectation of how we're starting, where we're starting, and how we'll chip away over time. Okay, I do my best to make yoga approachable and not something that's daunting. None of us live like yogis, at least I don't. And none of the students who walk into my studio are going to live like yogis, right? Especially the beginner student who is there for their own reasons and their own goals. But we set the stage acknowledging the roots of yoga. Okay, you would have heard me say it's an ancient practice. It's from India, and we really acknowledge its roots. That's very important. And then we acknowledge the vastness of the practice. Okay, how vast it is and how we're just exploring a tiny part of it through these poses. And then you contextualize where we are starting. That's kind of what you would have heard. You should have heard in that breakdown, you should have heard an acknowledgement of the roots, the vastness of the practice, and some contextualization. Now, all of this is said at the start of an asana class. Yes, I can absolutely go deeper, and there's always more to be said, but this is just class 1 and day 1, right? And again, operating from the student's viewpoint and not necessarily just us trying to overload them with information, okay? Notice how I've not said anything about Patanjali or nowadays you hear a lot of these political trends or anything that is trending on social media. The focus is on yoga and the timelessness of yoga. And that's very important for us as teachers to keep our mind on. Now, another thing I want to leave you with today is the mindset needed for yoga teachers as we teach beginners yoga. Okay, again, this is part of the manual, and I wanted to share a bit of what is coming your way. In the previous episode, 2 episodes ago, in episode 75, I spoke about the mindset of a student, the mindset of a beginner, and understanding that mindset so we can really talk to the person directly and understand the experience that they're going through. In today's episode, I want to end with the mindset for teaching beginners yoga, because if we don't condition our mind as we navigate to being a yoga teacher, it can get really challenging. Okay. So firstly, remember that you were a beginner once and you're still a beginner in many, many, many things. It's really humbling to remind yourself of that when you meet a beginner. Okay. And a beginner is an expert in something, right? So just know that you are a beginner in many things. And that is just humbling. It's a moment of grounding and it helps you to relate to the beginner a lot more.
Okay. Also remember, most learning happens at this level. When you're new, beginners are like a sponge. They'll absorb everything. Okay. And there's such a clean slate. And because most learning happens at this level, we as yoga teachers, we have an additional responsibility to do better and to hold ourselves to a higher standard to these newbies. And remember to always take the long view. Okay. These students could potentially practice with you for life. And what could be more rewarding than to see your yoga working for them? Also, our role is to teach everyone who comes to us without judgment or without a personal agenda. I have students who come to me because they want to do yoga as a fitness thing. Now, I don't judge them. I teach them with the same heart and the same intentions and the same respect that I would teach someone who wants to learn how to live yoga and study yoga and teach it to other people. Okay. So you want to really teach everyone who comes to you without judgment or any personal agenda. Recognize it's a person who needs clarity from you about the practice. Okay. This is not just random person on Instagram who you'll never meet. It's a person who is in front of you, who doesn't know what yoga is, and they are dependent on you to give them clarity and to move them from confusion to clarity. Okay. Build a professional rapport rooted in yoga with every student. Okay. And we'll be talking about this more in the course. But if you are rooted in your yoga, then it becomes so much more effortless to build that connection with another student. Okay. If you struggle to teach beginners, it's normal. Take a breath and tell yourself that it's normal. You just have to invest a little more in learning. And we always learn. Learning is a constant for us yoga teachers. Okay. Be willing to unlearn. That's very, very, very important. Be willing to unlearn. If you are not willing to unlearn some things, then it's probably just some ego that is stuck and stopping you from really uncovering more yoga. And remember, not all beginners will like you. They may not even like yoga. But we aren't there to be liked or to be popular. Okay. We're there to offer them yoga as yoga is. And it's up to them. How they react is up to them. Okay. You practice non-attachment in your teaching. Practice non-attachment in your teaching. Practice non-attachment in your yoga. And what does that mean? Oh, I can go on and on about what that means, but I will save that for the course itself. Okay. And lastly, remember to go the extra mile. Now, when I say go the extra mile, most of you will think that I'm saying go the extra mile for the student. Of course, that's implied. We do go the extra mile for the student, and what that means is something we'll explore in the course. But go the extra mile because it means something to you. Go the extra mile is actually more for you than for the student. When you truly invest in enriching a beginner's life with yoga, you're enriching yourself. You're deeply practicing your responsibility as a teacher. And to me, there is nothing more rewarding than that. Okay. And that is the experience that brings at least me back the next day and the day after and a decade later. Okay. Again, this is just a short excerpt of things that are waiting for you in the course. I want you to realize that teaching beginners yoga is not only about sequences and syllabus and stuff like that and poses. It's not what we do. That's one part of it. It's also how we do it and the intentions behind it and recognizing and living our yoga through our yamas and niyamas. And I can really get nerdy with you and this podcast will go on and on. But I know I've promised you a shorter episode today. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay. And I hope today's conversation brought you some clarity on how to break down what is yoga to a beginner. And if you're looking for these notes, okay, they'll be in our show notes at letstalk.yoga, and our course goes deeper. If these type of conversations really pique your interest, then the course will probably be a good fit for you. Okay.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, remember the Teaching Yoga to Beginners course starts November 7th, 2023. You can find all the details at ahamyoga.com. Just navigate to the teacher training page and head to Beginners Yoga Teacher Training. This course is suitable for any yoga teacher, whether you are new or experienced. It will help you to scale not only your beginner classes, but also your other classes. I am enrolling the final set of practitioners. As soon as we hit that final number, enrollments will be closing. We also have a price change coming November 1st, so make sure you get in on the early bird. If you have questions, let us know. As always, if you enjoy this show, you come back weekly for conversations. Please take a moment to rate, review, and share this with a yoga friend. I will see you next week. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.